The sun had barely begun to rise over the small town of Larksville, Louisiana, in the early hours of June 6, 2004, when young Ethan Marshall, 12 years old, wandered into the marsh behind his grandfather's old cabin. He had grown up listening to stories of gators, hidden treasures, and, most famously, the ghost of the swamp, a tale whispered by war veterans about a commander who vanished during the war and was never found. Armed with a long stick and boundless curiosity, Ethan poked at the waterlogged ground near the roots of a cypress tree. Something metallic caught the morning light, dull rusted, but unmistakably man-made. He pushed aside the damp moss and unearthed a long, narrow object. It was heavy and slick with mud, but as he turned it in his hands, he saw the faint imprint of numbers engraved along the shaft. A chill ran down his spine. Back at home, Ethan's grandfather, Ray Marshall, now 82, was sitting on the porch with a thermos of coffee when Ethan burst through the door holding the object in his arms. "Grandpa, I found this in the swamp. Look at the numbers." Ray took the artifact in trembling hands. He hadn't seen one in decades, but he knew the make of that weapon instantly. Satu Garand. "But this isn't just any rifle," he muttered, voice low with disbelief. He wiped the grime with an old cloth and leaned closer, reading aloud the serial, JW 1944-17. His eyes widened. "Jack Whitmore." Ethan blinked. "Who?" Ray sat down slowly. His bones ached more from the memories than the years. "Captain Jack Whitmore was my commanding officer in Europe. We served together in the 42nd Infantry Division. In November 1944, during a night reconnaissance mission near the Ardennes, volunteered to lead a detour around a suspected German encampment. He never came back. No body, no wreckage, just gone." Ethan looked from the weapon to his grandfather's face, now drawn and pale. "That's his rifle." Ray nodded slowly. "I'd bet my life on it." That evening, Ray made a call he hadn't dialed in over 4 decades to Colonel Richard Moore, one of the few surviving members of their unit. The man on the other end paused, then whispered, "Jack's gun. After all these years, where did you say you found it?" "Buried near the old base grounds, the swamp, off Route 17. There was a long silence. "That place used to be part of the extended perimeter during the war, before they converted it. You think he came back?" "I don't know," Ray said, "but that rifle being there means something." Within days, local authorities, veterans, historians, and even a small military forensic team arrived in Larksville. The story hit the local papers: mysterious World War II weapon found in Louisiana swamp. But for Ray, this wasn't about was about closing a door that had remained ajar for 60 long years. He kept the rifle on a clean white cloth, inside a glass case in his study. Every night, he would sit by it with a picture of his unit on his lap. 20 young men in uniform, grinning, unaware of the chapters life hadn't yet written. As the investigation deepened, records were pulled from old army archives, letters reread, maps re-examined. The swamp, it turned out, had once been a landing zone, a temporary one, hastily abandoned as German artillery advanced. And if Jack had somehow returned to US soil with no one knowing why, how, or perhaps someone had brought the weapon back, but why bury it? Ray couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch and looked out at the darkness that now seemed to hold secrets just below the surface. He whispered into the night, "Jack, what really happened to you?" Ray Marshall hadn't slept more than a few hours since Ethan unearthed the old rifle. He sat most nights in his study, sipping weak coffee, the rifle resting in its case, like a ghostly relic. Memories from the battlefield, long buried under time and routine, had resurfaced with an intensity he wasn't prepared for. On the 3rd day after the discovery, Ray finally opened the rusted trunk he'd kept sealed in his attic since 1953. It contained letters, medals, an old US Army uniform folded with reverence, and, buried beneath layers of yellowing newspaper, a stack of photographs. He pulled one out, a black and white shot of the unit in Bastogne, Belgium. December 1944. They were covered in mud, faces hollowed by exhaustion but still alive with defiant youth. Jack Whitmore stood dead center tall, broad-shouldered, a smirk that said he knew the odds and didn't care. But it wasn't the photo that startled Ray. It was what he found beneath it, a folded letter, its paper browned with age, sealed in an envelope marked simply, "Returned to Marshall, if undelivered." The handwriting was unmistakably Jack's. With trembling hands, Ray opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Ray, if you're reading this, then maybe I didn't make it. I had to take that trail through the forest tonight. I don't trust what the map says. If I find a safe path for the men, I'll light the flare at dawn. If not, stay back. Don't risk them for me. Tell my brother that I forgive him. And tell Margaret she was my best decision. Don't let my story end with silence. Jack Ray felt the words burn through his chest. No one had ever seen this letter. He didn't even remember how it got into his trunk. Did Jack give it to him? Did someone else? He took the photo and the letter to the local sheriff, Dean Wallace, a soft-spoken man who had served in Desert Storm and respected the weight of memory. Do you think Jack could have made it back? Ray asked. Sheriff Wallace rubbed his chin. If someone buried that rifle here, it means it wasn't left in Europe. Either he came home, or someone else did. Ray shook his head. Jack never returned. I would have known. That night, another memory surfaced. Jack had an older brother named Caleb Whitmore, who had been dishonorably discharged in 1943 after a bar fight turned violent. The Whitmore brothers hadn't spoken in years. Ray made another call, this time to a small VA home in Jackson, Mississippi, where Caleb was rumored to be living. The voice on the other end was raspy and guarded. Caleb Whitmore, who's been asking, "My name's Ray Marshall. I served with your brother Jack in Europe. In 1944, he vanished during a mission." There was silence. Then, a slow, drawn-out sigh. "I always knew this day would come," Caleb said. Ray frowned. "What do you mean?" Caleb cleared his throat. "I saw him. Years after the war, he came back. He didn't want anyone to know." Ray gripped the phone. "Are you saying he survived?" "I'm saying he survived something worse than bullets. He didn't come back the same. He dropped that rifle in the swamp because he didn't want it anymore. He came to me, then vanished again. I never saw him after that." Ray's heart pounded. Caleb added, "But I've got something else, something he left behind. You should see it." Ray didn't sleep that night. The thought of Jack, his commander, his friend, his ghost walking through America in silence after the war, was more haunting than the idea of him dying on foreign soil. The man who had led them through the yard, who had taken a bullet to save a rookie private, had returned and said nothing. By sunrise, Ray was behind the wheel of his old Dodge, heading south toward Mississippi. The drive took 8 hours. The VA home was a modest single-story building surrounded by oak trees and the scent of pine. Inside, time seemed slower, gentler, filled with the soft murmur of televisions, the rattle of wheelchairs, and the hush of forgotten stories. Caleb Whitmore was waiting on the front porch, his frame thinner than Ray remembered from the war registry photos, his hands twisted with age and regret. "I figured you'd come," he muttered, leading Ray into a small room filled with boxes, dusty books, and a single locked chest beneath. "The window, he brought this to me in 1955, Caleb said, kneeling slowly beside it, said I was the only one left he trusted. Ray watched in silence as Caleb turned the old key and opened the chest. Inside was a single leather-bound notebook. Its cover was cracked, its edges frayed. The initials JW were carved faintly into the corner. Caleb held it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "It's his journal." Ray opened the first page. "January 3rd, 1945. Somewhere in Georgia I made it out. I walked through fire, snow, and silence. They thought I died, and maybe I did, in some way. But I kept walking. I couldn't go back to the man I was before, not after what I saw, what I did, what I couldn't stop." Each page was a painful blend of memory, remorse, and fear. Jack had made it back to American soil, but he hadn't come home. He had lived in shadows, changing names, drifting between towns, unable to face the people who once looked up to him. Caleb looked out the window, his voice dry. He didn't just abandon the army, he abandoned himself. He couldn't live with what war had done to him. Ray closed the book and sat back, overwhelmed. But why bury the rifle? Caleb answered without hesitation. Because it was the last thing tying him to the war. He hated it. Said it spoke to him in his dreams, that he still smelled the blood on it. Ray blinked away tears. He was a hero. No, Caleb said softly. He was a man. And sometimes, that's harder to be. They spent hours reading the journal. It spoke of nightmares, of waking up in fields thinking he was back in the trenches. It spoke of letters he wrote, but never sent to Margaret, his fiancée, to Ray, and even to their commanding officer, who died months before the war ended. At the back of the journal was a sealed envelope. Ray opened it, breath catching in his throat. Inside was a photograph, faded but clear. Jack, sitting on a bench in a rural Georgia town, holding a little girl on his lap. A woman stood behind them, hand on his shoulder, eyes soft. Caleb nodded. That's Lena. He met her after he disappeared. The girl, she's his daughter. Ray stared at the photo. Jack Whitmore hadn't vanished. He had started over. Ray spent the night in a small motel just outside Biloxi. The journal lay open beside him on the bed, its pages breathing with secrets. Jack hadn't just run away, he had chosen a life of quiet redemption. But Ray knew there was still more to uncover. The next morning, Caleb met him with a worn shoebox. Jack left these with me, too. Said if anyone ever came asking someone who really knew him, I should pass them on. Inside were letters, at least a dozen, all addressed to a woman named Lena Mayfield. The envelopes were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words inside were still strong, trembling with emotion. March 2nd, 1956. Lena, every day I wake up and look at her face, our daughter's face, and I wonder how I deserved any of this. You saved me, not just from the war, but from myself. I don't want her to grow up with ghosts in the house, but sometimes I feel like I'm still bleeding, still trapped under snow and shrapnel. I love you for holding my hand through it all, even when I can't find the words. Ray's heart ached. Reading them, the name Mayfield rang a bell. He remembered a mechanic named Joe Mayfield from the war, a cheerful southerner from Georgia, who always talked about his little sister Lena. Was this the same woman? With Caleb's help, Ray traced Lena to a small town near Macon, Georgia. She had passed away in 1987, but her daughter, Jack's daughter, still lived there. Her name was June Whitmore. Ray drove up the winding rural roads that led to a modest house with a wraparound porch and sunflowers in the garden. A woman in her 40s stood at the fence, watching him with cautious curiosity. "Ma'am," Ray began, voice trembling, "my name is Raymond Ellis. I served with your father during the war. I think I have something that belongs to you." He handed her the journal, then the letters. June's hands shook. She sat down on the porch steps, flipping slowly through the pages, tears rolling silently. "My mother told me stories," she whispered. She said he was a brave man, but broken. That he tried to come home more than once, but always turned back at the train station. Ray nodded, kneeling beside her. "He was a good man, June. He saved lives. He saved my life." They sat together until the sun dipped behind the trees. The crickets sang. Somewhere inside, the past rearranged itself not as a wound, but as a bridge. That evening, June took Ray to the attic. Dust floated in the golden light. In the corner, beneath an old quilt, was a trunk Ray hadn't seen in 60 years. It was Jack's. Inside were medals, photographs, a telegram marked under, a wedding ring wrapped in linen, and tucked inside a book of poems was a silver brooch, the same one Jack had given Margaret before shipping off to France in '43. Ray's voice caught. He kept it. June looked at him, eyes full of wonder. He couldn't let go of who he was, but he tried to become someone better. Ray reached into the box and lifted out a photograph. Jack, standing in a field, holding a fishing pole, his daughter clinging to his leg. His smile was quiet, weathered, peaceful. In the summer of 2004, in the sweltering heat of rural Louisiana, 90-year-old Clayton Miller was doing what he had done nearly every morning for the last 4 decades, wandering through the shallow edge of Atchafalaya Swamp with his cane and his dog. Blue, the forest hummed with life, dragonflies zipped through the air, and the trees whispered secrets in the wind. Clayton wasn't looking for anything in particular, just walking, remembering, breathing in the stillness. But that morning, a glint of metal caught his eye beneath the roots of a cypress tree. Half buried in thick mud, curious, he knelt slowly, his joints crackling, and brushed away layers of dirt and moss. There, sticking out like a finger pointing to the past, was a rusted gun barrel, not a hunting rifle. Military issue. Clayton felt a strange chill run through him. He called the sheriff, who called the local historian, who then alerted the Veterans Archive, and within a week, Ray Ellis was standing at the edge of the swamp with June Whitmore beside him, staring down at the excavation site cordoned off by yellow rope. The specialists worked carefully, slowly brushing the earth away. What they found wasn't just a weapon, it was an M1 Garand, serial number intact, and beside it, entangled in the roots of the tree, were the remnants of an Army SAT-CHEL. On side, water damaged but preserved enough to identify, was a dog tag, Jackson. MHRPRA dropped to his knees. It was real. June placed a trembling hand on his shoulder, silent. Nearby, Clayton nodded solemnly. Been walking this swamp for 40 years. That spot's always been quiet, still, like something was sleeping there. Ray stared at the rifle, the satchel, the badge. There was more. Among the contents was a rusted compass, still faintly bearing the initials JH. Etched in the back, a gift from Joe Mayfield, Lena's brother. Decades earlier, it was as if the swamp had decided the time had come, that the war no longer needed to hide him, that Jack Harper's last trace could now surface, not as a ghost, but as a final gesture of truth. Later that evening, back in June's home, Ray sat on the porch with a notebook on his lap. The sun bled into the horizon, casting the fields in golden hues. I think he came here, he whispered. June looked up from her tea. To die? No, Ray said. To make peace. He wasn't hiding. He was choosing stillness, choosing to be forgotten. But he wasn't. June replied. The earth remembered. You remembered. Even that tree remembered. The next morning, they held a small memorial service in the swamp clearing. No television cameras, no parade, just a wooden cross, the rifle laid beneath it, and a folded flag that Ray carried in his hands. Clayton read a psalm in a voice like cracked wood. Blue barked once, and then went. Quiet. June placed a lily on the earth, and Ray whispered, You were never lost. You were just waiting for someone to find the truth. A week after the memorial, June Whitmore found herself unable to sleep. The discovery of Jack Harper's rifle and satchel had stirred more than just grief. It had opened a door she thought was permanently shut. Her brother Ray had been different ever since. Quiet, more reflective, and strangely calm. One afternoon, while cleaning out their family's old farmhouse near Lafayette, June stumbled upon a wooden chest tucked beneath the attic floorboards. It was heavy, sealed with rusted hinges, and covered with a faded blanket. She hadn't seen it since their parents passed. As she pried it open, the smell of old cedar and paper filled the air. Inside were family photographs, a few books, and an envelope, yellowed and delicate, addressed in a hand she recognized instantly. To Lena Whitmore. If ever found, please deliver. JH. June sat down slowly, her hands trembling. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded and worn, but still legible. June 1945, somewhere in Louisiana. Lena, if this ever finds you, know that I am sorry. For the silence, for the vanishing, for not being the man you deserved. The war changed me, and not in the way they write about in newspapers. I couldn't carry the weight of what we lost, what I lost, the men who never came back, the orders I gave that got boys killed. I was not a hero, Lena. I was just a man who did his duty, and afterward, I had nothing left. I never made it back to base. I turned south instead, into the swamps. I don't know why. Maybe because it was quiet there. Maybe because it was far enough from the noise to let me forget. But I never forgot you. You were my last thought on the battlefield. My only peace. I carved your name into a tree once, hoping the wind would carry it to you. Don't mourn me. I chose this silence. Forever yours. Jack. June's eyes filled with tears. She sat in stunned silence, feeling the weight of the words, of the years, of the silence that had hung between them all for so long. She showed the letter to Ray that evening. Read it in the same chair where their mother once embroidered quilts during long Louisiana winters. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then, softly, so he didn't die that day. No, June said, he disappeared. On purpose. Ray looked out the window, where dusk had begun to settle over the fields. Maybe he was already gone. Before he even left the war, they decided not to share the letter with anyone else. Not the papers, not the army. It was too personal, too sacred. Instead, they placed it in a new frame and set it above the fireplace in the family room. Below it, a small plaque read, Jack Harper loved, lost, found. In the weeks that followed, people from nearby towns came quietly to visit the swamp. They brought flowers, left notes. A few veterans saluted in silence before walking away. Story had spread by word of mouth. No headlines, just whispers. A man who had vanished not from cowardice, but from the need to breathe again. Autumn arrived in Lafayette, with its quiet, melancholy leaves turning golden, the air cooler, and the swamp finally drying after months of rainfall. It was then that June, driven by a sense of unfinished business, returned to the exact spot where Jack's satchel and rifle had been found. She brought a lantern, a pair of gloves, and her father's old army shovel. The soil was soft near the base of an ancient cypress tree, its bark riddled with time and Spanish moss hanging like memory threads. Something inside her whispered that this place held more than just rusted metal and forgotten roots. She dug slowly, carefully, at about a foot deep. The shovel hit something solid. June knelt and brushed away the earth. What emerged wasn't another weapon or relic, but a small tin box, sealed tight and stained with time. Her breath caught. The box creaked open in her hands, revealing a faded photograph of Jack and Lena, taken on the porch of the Whitmore house in 1939. A rusted army tag with his initials, J.H., a folded American flag, meticulously wrapped, and another letter. Hands shook as she unfolded it. November 1945, to whoever finds this box. This is not a confession, it's a farewell. I came here not to die, but to live outside the noise. I needed to remember who I was before the war changed. Me before the medals, the screams, the loss. I buried this here beneath the tree where I first felt peace again. If Lena ever finds this, know that I carried her name in my thoughts every day. That the world was cruel to many, and I only wished I could have given her the peace I found too late. If you're reading this, you've already uncovered what matters. Don't tell the world, let this stay here, let it be enough. Jack Harper June sat in the clearing for hours, watching the sun slip below the trees. She imagined him here alone, yet free, haunted, yet healing. Not the soldier in uniform, but the man behind the silence. The next morning she returned with Ray. Together, they placed a wooden cross at the base of the tree. Nothing ornate, nothing grand, just a simple marker carved by hand. Jack Harper, 1915. He chose silence, but never forgot love. As they stood there, a pair of ducks glided across the still waters nearby. The air smelled of pine and thyme. The swamp had held his story for 60 years, but now, finally, it had let go. The story of Commander Jack Harper never made it to the national news. June respected his final wish. No documentaries, no war memorials, just a quiet entry in the local records of Lafayette, private resting place discovered near Bayou des Chains, likely tied to World War II veteran. But within the Harper family, the story lived untold during Thanksgivings and passed to the younger ones as both mystery and memory. The wooden cross eventually weathered, but never fell. Locals began to leave small tokens at its base: army patches, folded notes, wildflowers. Some came just to sit beneath the tree, not knowing who Jack was, but feeling something sacred in the stillness. Ray never remarried. He tended the tree every fall and wrote his own letter before passing in 2012, asking to be cremated and scattered by the roots where Jack's memory lingered. And June, she published a small memoir titled Letters from the Cypress under a pseudonym. She never profited from it. It was her way of saying goodbye, of honoring the silence that held a soldier's truth for 6 decades. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe if this story touched your heart. Help us keep the memory of these forgotten heroes alive. Comment below, what would you have done if you were June? Like this video if the story moved you. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life inspired mysteries from the past. Sometimes, what history forgets, we can help the world remember.